Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. I cannot believe tomorrow is Thanksgiving Day here in the United States, that we're rolling into the end of November, and that next week is December already. I mean, it's insane, but I'll tell you, what a month it's been on this podcast. We've been focused on innovation this entire month, and if you have missed any of the incredible episodes, go back and watch them on demand on DroneLife TV on YouTube and check them out. We really appreciate Iris Automation being our sponsor this month and all the spectacular speakers we've had thus far. And boy, are we ending on a high note here with John Eberhardt from ATA LLC, Vienna, Virginia-based company that's doing just incredible things that are really going to kind of kick it up a notch when we're talking about unmanned traffic management. By the way, before we get deeply into ATA and John and the Virginia Fix and everything we're going to talk about today, I just want to remind everybody this is live. So go ahead and tell us where you're coming from. Say hello. Ask John questions because he's an amazing expert. And give us positive encouragement. We absolutely love that. So anyway, without further ado, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and happy Turkey Day.
Thank you so much for that. I'm looking forward to it, actually. I've got some family, and so hopefully you won't hear them in the background. I got some folks sleeping in my basement, my parents, actually. But John, let's talk a little bit about your incredibly varied career and how that background impacts your view of innovation in the drone space.
Sure. Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, I've had kind of an interesting career path. I consider myself a quant. I actually started life as an economist and then ended up starting a machine learning company in San Francisco in the early 00s. And that took me to Washington, D.C. And from there, I ended up working as a contractor at the FAA, helping them implement their initial enterprise information management program. And from there, did some other consulting, ended up at ATA. And the intersection of my quantitative and sort of data science background with my work at the FAA has really allowed me to fall in love with the idea of applying data science techniques to aviation, especially unmanned aviation, where we're going to be really pushing the envelope.
Well, you certainly already are. And John, you're super modest. So I'm going to take a second and deviate here and talk a little bit about your bio because so many times people don't brag on themselves when they should. So your bio says you developed over 20 analytical solutions in clinical decision support, cybersecurity, molecular diagnostics, risk management, product marketing, including award-winning healthcare quality applications. Oh, by the way, everybody, that's not all. He also has 1 patent and 5 patent applications in process, over 45 publications and speaking engagements. And I guess this is number 46 if we're counting.
Yep.
And I'm glad to be your number 46 here. So for everybody out there, again, just for context, who you're listening to right now is a true thought leader in these advanced analytics and data science with an emphasis in machine learning. And, so let's talk about then, you mentioned, John, your journey and now you're with ATA. How did you wind up at ATA?
That's a great question. And actually, the point on my bio, I'll share a tip with everybody. It's all about stats and math. And if you're ever talking to someone at a party that you want to get away from, just tell them you love math and they head for the hills. It's really great. So how I ended up at ATA.
Well, John, I have to say, the minute you tell them you're a lawyer, their eyes go dead and the conversation ends. So I'll one-up you on that.
Well, I will say I've known people to ask for free legal advice. I have yet to meet someone who asks for free math advice.
Well, point well
taken. But hopefully they're out there. So how I ended up, so the CEO, Craig Pariseau, is a former client of mine. We became friends. And, I had my own consulting practice at the time. And Craig was recruited in to become the CEO of ATA. He took me to breakfast and he said, John, I'm not going to do this without you. And I now understand what he really meant by that, which was not, I won't do it if you say no. What he meant is, I'm not going to let you, John, say no to me. So I've now been with ATA for 6 years, almost 6 years. And when I joined, I said, here's my condition. So, Don, thank you for the background of my bio. One of the things I've learned doing data science is that you can produce really great pieces of technology, right? But a lot of them end up as what I like to call science projects. So things that are really exciting technology, but they never get used because people don't think about how to integrate them with how people actually work and live and play in the real world. And so I said, as long as we stay focused on making sure that the work gets integrated into the real world and makes a difference, I'll be here. And I will say that the company's absolutely fulfilled that goal. I'm very excited, and some of the things we'll talk about today are in that vein.
Well, that's a perfect segue, really, to talk about that, John, and what you've achieved in those 6 years since you've been at the helm as the CTO of ATA. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So a number of things. And the easiest one is when I joined, it was to help kind of reshape the company. The company had a lot of presence in the defense and intel space, but not a lot of presence in software development. On my first day, the technical personnel were 2, me and 1 contractor. So since then, we've now got, I think as of yesterday, 36 engineers that work at the company. We have developed an aviation practice, both on the federal, state, and commercial. We do work in the defense community, the intelligence community, the logistics community. I have a healthcare background. We're looking at some healthcare things. Haven't started that yet. But in addition to doing that, we developed a number of production systems at the FAA. So there's something the FAA has called the EIM platform, and our team helped contribute to that.
John, what's EIM? You and I always talk about, we were on Clubhouse last week. I'm like, acronyms.
Yeah. EIM stands for Enterprise Information Management.
Got it. But and you did that for the FAA.
We were part of the team that did that for the FAA, and we developed some precursor systems that got rolled into it. We've developed our own Lance USS application, and we got onboarded there. We also have a very deep partnership with L3Harris, where we support some of their commercial aviation applications, and they're great guys to work with. I really, really love that partnership. And then, of course, obviously the Virginia Flight Information Exchange. And then there's a whole bunch of the fix. Yep.
All right, so let's break that down, and let's start with Lance. I'm sure a number of folks out there, we've got a lot of the drone crowd out there, they know what Lance is, but not everybody does. So for those that don't know, Lance is the FAA's Low Altitude Authorization Notification Capacity. So it's an acronym. And what it does is supports air traffic control like authorization requirements for drone operations. It enables remote pilots to apply and receive near real-time authorizations right online for operations 400 feet above ground level and below in controlled airspace. And really, John, when you think about it, Lance is kind of like one of those first stepping stones to unmanned traffic management that's been launched by the FAA. And as you mentioned, ATA is now a Lance provider. The FAA has approved a couple other commercial companies as UAS service suppliers in its Lance as well. Yep. John, can you explain the USS, the UAS service supplier, what that concept exactly is in the UTM kind of overall paradigm?
Absolutely. And UTM stands for UAS Traffic Management. UAS stands for Unmanned Aerial System. And I love, you have to love the FAA, because I have some examples, which I won't share for time, of these third and fourth order compound acronyms.
Beyond is one of those, by the way.
It is, I know.
I can't tell you from heart, like by heart, what it is. The UPP, our producers in the background, like, the UPP. So anyway.
It's amazing the ability to create acronyms from acronyms. So as you mentioned, Lance, in a nutshell, what Lance is the capability that allows the remote pilot of an unmanned system to file a flight plan with the air traffic organization. So just like if you're a manned pilot and you're going to transit controlled airspace, you have to file a flight plan. So it basically allows for unmanned aerial vehicles to integrate with the controlled airspace. The USS program, and there are lots of nuances to it, so I'm going to probably oversimplify it in the interest of time. But the USS program, the FAA basically takes a company that wants to have access to filing flight plans with the air traffic organization through LANS, and it basically puts you through a series of rigorous steps. So they validate your engineering procedures, your security controls. You have to go through an application process to show them you're a legitimate business and not, but well, if you're a guy in a garage, you have to be a legitimate guy in a garage, right? And they so they really go through and vet you, and they do a rigorous quality control on the software. What I think is the most interesting piece about that whole USS space are two things. So one, there are 17 companies that have been onboarded by the FAA. They all have different approaches and different business models. So, for example, there are really great companies like Aloft and Wing and Skyward that are going after what I'd call the operator-facing market. And then, for us, it's more about an integration platform for other value-added services. And so you talked about UTM or UAS traffic management. This is the FAA's concept of operations for how they're going to manage unmanned systems in the context of aviation overall. And our interest, given our background and kind of our DNA, is how do we support the integration of data and services across all of these different providers. And so our interest in being a USS is how we can participate in this system and facilitate moving data around and adding value to data so that some of those companies I mentioned, like Aloft and Wing and Skyward, they can take advantage of data services in their core mission of helping the operator manage flight and manage risk.
Yeah, we're gonna get deeply into this with the Virginia Fix and your AirDex product. Before we do that, John, I just want to kind of note for everybody out there, if you want to learn more about Lance and who all of the USSs are, they're right on the FAA's website. If you just Google FAA USS or FAA Lance, LAANC, you're going to find that information. The FAA website is pretty spectacular when it comes to providing pretty great information about all of these different topics, including UTM or UAS traffic management. So let's shift for a second and talk, John, about the Virginia Fix, FIX acronym that you mentioned. What exactly is it, and how does ATA kind of play in that space?
Great question, Dawn, and I'll answer it a little bit out of sequence. So the FIX acronym stands for Flight Information Exchange. And the way that we are involved and come to the table is we were part of the initial group in a public-private partnership that created the Flight Information Exchange. And we did that by leveraging existing software that we have. That's our software product called AirDex. But most people in the general public will never see or use an AirDex. It's the platform that we bring to state and local government to facilitate these types of data integration services. So what is the FIX? The FIX is what the Commonwealth of Virginia refers to as an authoritative SDSP. So what is that acronym? So, as Dawn mentioned, you can go read the FAA's UTM ConOps. It's actually a pretty good read. It's not super long. You could read it over the holiday if you're trying to hide from relatives in the cellar. So, but as we know, it's full of acronyms, and the SDSP acronym stands for Supplemental Data Service Provider. And so the typical example that people use would be a provider of weather services, right? So like what Don Burkhoff at True Weather is trying to do.
Yeah, we had Don on here. Boy, when was it? Don Burkhoff and Mike DeCasla, Drone Industry Systems Corp, were on the podcast back in September, and Don is they're both doing amazing things, but Don is, we call him the Weather Don for a reason.
He is. And we're a customer, by the way. We're a customer of True Weather, just so everyone knows. It's a great product. And so, but there are other pieces in there, right? So the FAA talks about constraints. It talks about ground rules. It talks about aviation, or airspace configuration data. And when the FAA says airspace configuration, they're typically thinking about controlled airspace and, waypoints and navigational aids and procedures for airports. Well, and this is where the fix gets really interesting. Unmanned systems need the same things. If you're a drone, and especially when we get into BV loss, beyond visual line of sight and autonomous vehicles, you're going to need to know what the constraints are. You have to know where you can and can't go. You have to know where landing might be illegal or there's a supplemental rule required, right? A great example is
takeoff, right?
Or
like there's places
correct.
where you can't take off and land.
Correct. I mean, pretty much all federal military installations, right? You are not allowed to take off or land there without express permission. And the FAA provides that data. However, where it gets really interesting is, so now we go to the Commonwealth of Virginia or any other state for that matter, right? You are not allowed to take off or land on a state police facility without permission. Just like you or I, we can't simply walk into a prison. We can't walk into a police training facility, right? These are restricted facilities for safety reasons. And in addition, there's all other kinds of really interesting information about, hazards, obstructions. I like to use the example of the water treatment and sewage plants. They're not on the and so this, I'm getting to the value proposition. Apologies, I'm probably being a little long-winded, but the water treatment and sewage plants, right? If you're at 5,000 feet in a traditional manned aircraft and you're worried about the sewage plant, something is very, very, very wrong, right? But let's say you have a 25-pound photogrammetry drone that you're doing aerial mapping with, right? Well, weather can come up, you can have a battery failure, and it's pretty easy to drop that drone into the sewage plant. And there are all sorts of bad things that happen when you drop your vehicle into a sewage plant for everybody, right? I don't think I have to go into it. I think people kind of understand the example. And
I
so,
was going to say something that was probably not appropriate.
Right, I know.
Little star T.
I know exactly. Right? Exactly. Except now you're out one very expensive drone, right? And the plant has to shut down and do all of their recovery stuff. And so the value of this program and the reason why Virginia created it is in essence to fill in what I like to call the white space between the ground and the traditional FAA charts. FAA has great charts, but they typically, are 1,000 feet and above because that's where your manned aviation happens. They've got some obstructions and hazards down at the kind of 400 to 500 foot level, particularly around airports. But all the things that you want to know, operating in that low altitude space, you want to be able to get them from an authoritative source.
Well, so John, when you and I met, and by the way, everybody, I met John through my buddy and all of yours probably, Dave Kraus from Influential Drones, one of the FAA's industry. He's a drone pro, but also part of the lead industry rep for the FAA safety team. He introduced me by email to John, and I knew he was going to be at the National Association State Aviation Officials Conference, NASAO, in Colorado Springs, which is where I live. So we met in person, and John started telling me about the fix and everything he's doing, and I was just blown away because what John hasn't explained to you yet, and I'm going to pick your brain a little bit more about this, John, is all of these hazards he's talking about, whether it's the sewage plant he just mentioned or something, some tower that wouldn't be on an FAA, map at this time. Literally him and his team were kind of gumshoeing it around, like, surveying areas and getting this data and putting it all into his system and the Virginia fix to have this holistic picture. So again, this kind of comprehensive, local, state, municipal level information about what's on the ground that you care about as a drone pilot, in addition to things, as you said, John, like the weather, like we didn't talk about this, but like local, well, you kind of alluded to it, but let's just be absolutely clear. If I'm a drone pilot and I tap into this system, I can see what the local rules are in one spot. I don't have to go look it up myself. Right? So that's kind of a value proposition as well. So I thought this was just amazing what you're doing there in Virginia. You mentioned that it's authoritative, and you said that word a couple of times. That words have meaning, as we both know. Can you explain to everybody what the Virginia legislature did vis-a-vis the fix in the Commonwealth? And you are muted, I believe, or somehow I lost your sound.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, sorry. That's a great point, Dawn. And the reason that it's referred as an authoritative SDSP is because the data comes from the Commonwealth of Virginia. So a very important point. You talk about our system, and we provide the software, but we ATA, we do not own the data. The data belongs. Correct. The data belongs, the data from the fix, it belongs to the Commonwealth of Virginia. It belongs to the public. It is a public asset, and that is a very, very important aspect of this program. Right? In that, in order for this data to be comprehensive and safe, it needs to be as broadly available as possible. And so you talk about how do people tap into it? Well, there's a public website, virginiafix.com, where a member of the public and see what's on the site. And that's interesting in its own right, because for the public safety agencies, they want to share information with the public. It helps them with their mission. If you're a pilot, you can also go to that website and identify all of the information. But you can also get that through your USS provider, because part of the program is to provide programmatic system access to USSs for free. Because again, if it's safety data, we want it as broadly available as possible. So the other point you made is, I'm sorry, you made a point about.
Well, it's definitely hard to keep up with me sometimes, John.
Yeah, sorry. There was another point you made that was interesting, and I kind of forgot what it was.
No, it's okay, because we'll probably wind up going over it anyway, because I wanted to kind of break down what you just said into all of these different, let's just call them stakeholders. Right. So number one, as you mentioned, kind of AirDex is really built for your kind of public and your government agencies, including public safety, to utilize directly and push out things like safety notifications and real-time information that drone pilots and the public need to be aware of. So tell me a little bit from that perspective, from that stakeholder perspective, of the governmental aspect, the public safety, the government types. What are those value propositions for those particular stakeholders? In other words, what is AirDex contributing to their mission and to their operations?
That's a great question. And actually, I remember what your point was. What did the legislature do? And it's related to that, right? So
here I am, the lawyer, talking about the law.
Yep. No. What did the legislature do? Right. So the original premise of the fix, it was basically spurred on because of public safety working with the Department of Aviation. And so public safety said, we recognize that we are not sharing information effectively with each other and with the public. So can we set up an information sharing capability so that we know where the other public safety agencies are operating and we're aware of hazards, obstructions, and rules? And then we said, we can share that with the public as well. And that helps them understand what the rules are. And one of the conversations was about, from a policy perspective, the leadership in the Commonwealth wanted to keep the system as open as possible. Right? They wanted to make this a public asset, make access to it as broadly available as possible to facilitate an open system. So how that relates to the legislature, and this gets into your point about the value for stakeholders. So after the fixed program was initiated, the General Assembly passed a bill called House Bill 742. And what that does in Virginia is it devolves the right to regulate takeoff and landing on public property to what is called political subdivisions, which isn't just cities or counties. It includes sewer districts, school boards. There are hundreds of these things.
Okay.
And so the brilliance of how the Department of Aviation handled this was when they wrote their regulation, they said any political subdivision that creates a public property regulation for takeoff and landing, it has to be filed with Department of Aviation and published through the fix in order to be valid. So basically, if there's a rule and it's not published through DOAV in the fix, DOAV stands for it doesn't
you can't
apply.
schwack people for it, right? Like you can't
Right.
go after them, and yeah, so
And,
perfect.
and this was this made industry very happy because now they know I have one place to go to know what the ground rules are, right? I have one belly button to push if I have a problem with how they're being implemented. And it's given rise to this really cool function where we're doing data governance. And so the fix has a monthly user group where the government agencies, representatives from the industry, the USSs all get together and we talk about issues. So all of the data advisories, information in the system, it's all managed through a formal governance process. And that's part of the authoritative concept, right? In that not only is the data coming from and belong to the Commonwealth, there's a formal process for managing it, which means that, and I am getting to your question, which means
No,
that
I'll ask it again. Just keep going. It's good stuff.
which means that if a police department or a fire department is publishing an incident advisory, it has to fit certain parameters to be valid. The system won't accept it, right? So, for example, for certain types of incidents, it has to be within a half-mile radius. So you can't just say I'm the sheriff and I'm just going to tell you can't take off or land in the entire county, right? That's not allowed. You can if it's a disaster scenario and there's a specific type of disaster and emergency advisory.
Right.
But again, if you use that one, then by definition you're saying that the Virginia Department of Emergency Management has jurisdiction. So it's really nicely governed. So for the public safety folks, the value is one, waiving operators off of hazards. So, the great example I have is I'm having lunch with one of the local public safety or emergency management directors. And he says, oh, well, that thing across the street needs to be in your system. And I look at it and it's a Southern States. And I said, well, why?
What is it?
A Southern States. So for those who aren't living in the South,
Yeah.
Southern States is an agricultural co-op. They sell feed and grain, and they also sell bulk fertilizer.
Oh, okay.
Right. And if you crash if you were to crash an M600 into that facility and cause sparks, you could have a very nasty explosion.
Wow.
I had never thought
just
about
didn't
this.
give somebody a really bad idea.
Well, hopefully, but
no, I mean, it belongs on a map.
It belongs on a map.
This is your point.
Right. It also the value of defining the boundaries of a public safety incident. So now I've given notice to operators that this is where police and fire are operating. So if you federally, you're allowed to operate inside the boundary, but bear in mind that I've now told you that if you do something that interferes, if you collide with my public safety drone, if you collide with the fire truck, if you ditch into the middle of an active shooter situation and disrupt it, you violate, you've interfered with public safety, right?
Yeah. Well, right now, John, I mean, I'm sure you do know this. That's a federal offense too right now. I
Yes,
think they put that
correct.
in the, if I recall correctly, it was I think it was the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, if I recall correctly. But yeah,
Yep.
they added a whole list of things, including, interfering with wildland firefighting and things of this nature, just because there've been a number of incidents like what you're talking about.
And this is a big piece of why the public ownership and authoritative aspects and the governance aspects are really important, because there are a lot of things in these regulations that are, to some degree subjective, right?
Yeah.
The operations over people rule allows operations over people, but not operations over events. Well, who says that it's an event? Well,
Right.
now what's happening is local public safety is saying this is an event.
This is an event.
Right. So the operator can rely on that and say, okay.
There's no ambiguity. I mean, that's, I could see where some people might turn the table and say, oh, well, now we just have more restrictions. But the point is, the reality is you're going to be enforced in that area. So it's a great way to give people notice. And, in the law, that's what we always talk about, right? Is
Yes.
Having the notice. And now
Exactly.
with the Virginia fix and the way your legislature in the Commonwealth of Virginia has postured this, it does provide, as you said, an authoritative source, a one-stop shop place to go, and that's really great. We had drone responders also, John, on here,
Mm-hmm.
Charles Werner,
Yep.
and then of course the Airborne Incident Response Team, Chris Todd, that works with Charles, and
great guys.
I'm hoping you're working with them, and I know we're going to talk about the future and kind of what else, where else ATA might be going in the future with some of this, but let's so the public safety proposition is great, and look, you and I talked about this on Clubhouse last week with our family there.
Hmm.
You know, the fact that um, we always in this community speak about public acceptance, and I think you and I
Yes.
both fully appreciate that transparency goes a long way to public acceptance. And clearly your public safety people get that, because they are the ones that came to the Commonwealth and to you and said, here's what we want to do. I mean, it's no coincidence that the FAA, when they had their drone safety awareness week back in September, which by the way, I did some videos with Dave Kraus. They're on my website. They're, I think, still up on the FAA's safety team website.
They're
Um,
worth watching.
yeah, one of the days was literally public safety, public acceptance.
Yes.
And you know, when I first saw that topic, I was like, that's a weird combination. Like, what do they have to do with each other? And then it made sense the more I thought about it. Like, that's what the public sees. They see
Yes.
public safety. They know, you know, so whatever public safety does or doesn't do, they are probably like the greatest, or conversely could be the worst ambassadors for drone technology. And the fact that your guys and gals out there get it and came to you and said, let's make this transparent. Let's have a way to communicate with people. Let's make sure the rules are clear. I mean, that's, you know, as a lawyer, I mean, look, my eyes are watering. I mean, this is eye-watering stuff. Um, I'm a nerd. So let's back up for a second though, John, because I think I want to kind of be clear. You know, I don't want to get too sciencey, because I'm not a science geek, unlike you know, math expert and all that, you know, data science. But, you know, we talked about this supplemental data service provider, SDSP, this idea that, you know, that you're basically kind of connecting a lot of different, I don't know if you call them nodes or different APIs. Can you explain to people, like through AirDex, like this, what an API is, the concept, how it connects through AirDex, and the value of that to the overall, you know, kind of unmanned traffic management
Sure.
future?
Yeah. So you know, API, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it basically is a technical term that references how computers talk to each other. So, and a piece of software that has an API, what it basically means is that software has a, you know, a place somewhere on the internet where another program can reach out and either share information or request information. The reason why APIs matter in this context is if you go and read the FAA's UTM ConOps, the UAS Traffic Management Concept of Operations, the premise of this is that this should be a federated system. So you can have different USSs working together, you can have different UTM providers working together, you can have different supplemental data service providers working together. And so in order for that to work, these applications all have to talk to each other, right? And they all have to be able to share information. And it kind of comes back to the vision that the government of the Commonwealth of Virginia has of having an open system where the users, whether they're public safety or private operator, are free to choose the tools and systems that work for them. And that doesn't mean that by doing that, they now don't have access to this very valuable safety data. So that's a quick summary.
Well, and the public nature of it, you mentioned it's a web-based graphical user interface, or GUI. So basically a web-based application where people can plug into that, understand what's happening. You guys also have a mobile app interface as well for, you know, law enforcement and pilots on the go. So that's pretty important. And, you know, I think what we didn't mention, John, is the fact that from the governmental perspective, not just, you know, public safety, but public safety and other governmental entities, whether it's critical infrastructure, like some of the folks we mentioned, prisons, whatever, they can actually upload information, right, actively into this system. That's that AirDex component. That's the governmental focused side of it. You know, if there's two faces to it, that's the governmental face of it. They can do that, right?
Yes, and we're actually actively integrating the system. This is a little bit of what's next. So we're actually actively integrating the system with GIS systems at Department of Emergency Management.
And
So
GIS, for those that don't know,
oh,
although I
geographical information systems. So most people are familiar with a tool called ArcGIS, right? So most government agencies have one of these ArcGIS servers. So we're actively integrating with the GIS systems for Virginia Department of Emergency Management, or VDEM. We're doing the same thing with Virginia DOT, Department of Transportation. And so there's going to be a two-way interface with this, so that these agencies are able to be publishing information in real time.
So something like, as an example, a geohazard, a rock fall on a highway, and now the highway's closed. The Department of Transportation can now push that out. Public safety now knows, and to the extent that there's a response there, and that highway, drivers can't cross that area anymore.
Yes.
Now everybody knows.
Yes, and a VDOT right-of-way changes, that gets pushed to the system in real time. It gets pushed out to the USS provider in real time. So if you're planning an operation and you want to land on a VDOT right-of-way, and today's the day when that right-of-way goes away for whatever legal reason, you get notified, hey, you can't land here anymore, right? Not without talking to the property owner. And then the other thing we're doing is we're integrating with the 911 systems. They call them computer-aided dispatch. So for certain types of events where that there's a lot of risk, right? Think of a riot, I hate to say an active shooter, right? It'll throw up an advisory so that your operator can, private operator will know, hey, I need to be very thoughtful about operating in this area right now because there's a fire, right? There's something going on. In the first quarter, we'll be rolling out some initial sensor integrations. So the Commonwealth's been investing in smart cities. So there'll be flood sensors, environmental sensors, weather sensors, and to reiterate, this data is all meant to be consumed by the USS providers downstream to provide value-added services to their pilots, right? Their pilot customers.
So it's providing it to the USSs that are in turn providing it to the pilots, but pilots can also get it directly through the Virginia Fix.
They can.
And you have, remind me, John, you've at this point integrated about, for Virginia alone, seven of the Lance and USS providers?
Yes. Of the 17 onboarded providers, 7 of them have been onboarded to the program. And we'll probably onboard some more early next year. It all depends on who wants to. But it also has to do to some degree with what the business models are, right? Sure. Because the providers that are very much focused on, providing applications to the operator, right? Aloft is a great example, right? They have 2 different products where they're trying to provide, better guidance for safety to the UAS operator. This data is really, really helpful for them.
Yeah. Well, I think we got Wing, Verizon, Skyward, Aloft, SkyGrid, DroneUp, ATA, of course, your own company, and then Airspace Link as well. So those are the 7. And I think we covered it, but just a foot stomp, because I know a number of remote pilots watch this podcast. It's a great source of information for them. Let's just to be super clear from their perspective, if they are flying in Virginia, I'm a remote pilot. How does the Virginia Fix and your AirDex product, how does that help me as an RP?
So it helps you because you can either, if your USS application is onboarded to the Fix and supports advisories, you can get the information in your USS application, or you go to the Virginia Fix website, which is virginiafix.com. And you can check where you're operating to see if there are any advisories. And so those advisories will tell you if there are any takeoff and landing restrictions on public property. So interesting anecdote, in Virginia, you're not allowed to take off or land with an unmanned system in a state park or wildlife management area. You are allowed to take off or land in a state forest if you send an email to the right email address. Okay. So if you're operating in Southwest Virginia where there's lots of state-owned land, you can go to the Fix, see where you're operating, and say, okay, I have to email this guy, right? Or I can't land here, but I can land next door. It'll also tell you, again, if there are public safety incidents going on in the area. It'll provide information about ground hazards, so you can design your flight plan so that you don't run the risk of ditching into the water plant. So all of that information that you would get, the manned aviation equivalent would be what you'd get from a ForeFlight or a Jeppesen.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm sure there's probably pilots out there super frustrated. You always hear about, oh, patchwork quilt of regulations and local level stuff. But, the reality is it's called the 10th Amendment. And, it's,
Well,
the state and locals, they absolutely are under the 10th Amendment, responsible for the general welfare. And that includes property law
yep,
and, things like privacy and trespass and whatnot. But we are getting super close here on our time, and I know there's a couple things we want to cover before
yep.
our time together closes here, John. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you before we come close, I mean, the fix launched in August of 2020. Tell us how far it's come just in this short period of time.
So in about 15 months, it went from having 9 agencies with 2 advisories to over 40 agencies, 7 US onboarded USS providers, and we have over 1,000 advisories in the system now.
Wow.
So a lot of information for pilots, and again, to your point about the purpose of the system is not to prevent people from operating. It's to actually give them clarity as to what the local rules and hazards are, right? So 1,000 different pieces of information to help pilots make better decisions.
In a user-friendly and consumable way, and not just for
And
pilots,
free.
but also for the public.
Yes, and free. I'd add
And
free to the
free.
pilots and public. Yes.
I mean, that's amazing. So real quick, tell us, I've heard you talk about drone-ready communities. I think you kind of alluded to this, some of the smart
Mm-hmm.
city sensor purchases that are occurring there in Virginia. Tell us about this drone-ready community concept that
Sure.
we talk about.
This comes directly out of the governance activity. So by virtue of working in the system governance, we've worked with zoning and planning, emergency management, public safety agencies, school districts, and basically what they all say is, this stuff sounds really neat. We would love to be able to support unmanned systems and UAS and drones in our community. How do we do this? And so we've basically worked up in partnership with all these localities in the Commonwealth, a series of kind of manuals and best practices and guidelines for how to think about how to lay out the information in your community so that you can give the pilot the information that they need to conduct safe, effective, and compliant operations. And so the idea is to get ready to basically embrace and welcome the drone industry into your community to do operations. And one of the real positives that I've seen is almost everybody wants to support the growth of the industry. Right? Yes, you hear about people doing drone bans. They're very actually infrequent. And
Yeah.
so really what they want to do is, how do we get this out so that industry can come and operate here safely and effectively?
Yeah, we were talking last week with Jack Elston, and then before that was Elsight. And I remember saying, I think it was with Elsight, I said, if there was a word of the day, it would be relationships. I mean, clearly that's the theme here too. Collaboration, I think, is the word that I would use for what you all have
Yep.
been doing as a template for other states, with the success that you have had in Virginia. So
Yes.
that's probably a great, as we come close to the end here, question, what can we expect next? Where else are y'all going, if you can tell us?
So I think a couple things. So one, as I mentioned, additional systems integration. So the sensors, the CAD systems, and again, it's focused on integrating public systems to make public data available to the public
Yeah.
and to the industry. The second piece is both ATA and the Commonwealth of Virginia are engaged in active discussions with other states and localities about collaborating, and the model is really one where it's not just about getting the technology and the data out there. It's making sure that these government entities are collaborating so that the data and the rules are consistent. So I think in the first quarter of next year, you're going to see some pretty neat announcements about some new state-to-state partnerships. Virginia already has a partnership for this program with North Carolina that was announced in August. And there are probably going to be another 2 to 4 announced in the first quarter of next year. So we're very excited about that because, again, to your point, nobody wants a patchwork.
Well, and John, I know you're keeping that on the down low, but if Colorado ain't on your list, I'm telling you, it needs to be, and we need to get you out here. I'm going to continue my role as the president CEO of US Colorado next year, which is the state's only business league for the unmanned aircraft ecosystem. And we're going to be advocating hard to move the ball forward in this state. So would love to continue this conversation from a purely,
let's do that. Yep.
in a way, selfish Colorado standpoint. But hey, look, we're coming up here at the end, John, and this was absolutely amazing. I hope everybody here learned something. And as you think about, how your state is doing on the drone leaderboard, think about ATA and what John and his colleagues, and I'm talking cross-functional, cross-disciplinary, across, all the different levels of government and private industry coming together to make this Virginia fix happen, and then the legislature to make this happen. I mean, absolutely incredible what you've done. Look forward to seeing what's next. Thank you so much for your support, for being here. I think that's a wrap. And what I did also want to do is, since we are closing out Innovation Month, is also once again thanks Iris to Iris Automation that sponsored this entire month. Just spectacular speakers. John, like I said in the beginning, perfect way to round this out. And all right, the only other thing I want to say, everybody, we are at time, and I got to do it. So go ahead and take your screen. I'm going to step back, take your screenshot now. I'm going to do it here myself. All right, we are, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. So I wanted to go ahead and wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and just remind you that our normal clubhouse tomorrow will not be occurring. We're doing that today. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Mountain, get an hour break, and then I'm back on the horn here, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we are kicking off our final month of the year. Our theme is going to be the best of 2021, and it's sponsored by Sage Tech Avionics. So we're going to have their CEO, Tom Fury, on Clubhouse today. Please join us. It's going to be awesome. And then you can start basting your turkey. So everybody, thanks so much out here. Happy Thanksgiving. And next week we'll have Tom.
Thanks, Dawn.